All right, so we have talked about how diseases spread within an individual, or how the infection kind of proceeds within an individual person. But now let's kind of step back and talk about how diseases spread through populations. And there's many ways that this can occur. And it can depend upon the interactions between people, or interactions between people and animals, or interactions between people and their environment. So there's a lot of infectious agents that we've talked about, the bacteria, the virus, fungi, and they can all be transmitted either directly through contact, or through droplets, or through bodily fluids, or indirectly through contamination with food, or water, or air, or other vectors like mosquitoes. And that's what we're going to be talking about. So understanding how these pathogens kind of persist when they're outside the body and how they move from one individual to another is really essential for controlling outbreaks. So one of the terms that we're going to be introducing here is what we call a reservoir. So one of the key concepts in understanding disease transmission is understanding what a reservoir are. So this refers basically to the natural habitat in which the pathogen lives. So where can you normally find it? Where does it live? Where does it grow? Where does it kind of multiply kind of on its own? So reservoirs can be humans, right? So we could be a reservoir for a particular pathogen. It could be other animals, or it could be an environmental source such as soil or water can serve as the reservoir for a particular pathogen. All right. So basically they serve as the source from which infections are transmitted to susceptible individuals. And typically, let's say if a reservoir, let's say was a bat, and it's a reservoir for a particular virus. So a lot of times the virus may be dangerous to humans, but to the reservoir, it's not dangerous to them at all. It's harmless to them. Okay, so the reservoir is kind of where do you normally find this microorganism, right? So it's primary habitat, as it says. Now, this is different from the term transmitter. So a transmitter is the agent that basically transmits the pathogen, right? So it moves the agent from the reservoir to a new host. That's what the transmitter does. So sometimes the reservoir and the transmitter are the same. For example, in humans, we are the only reservoir and source of the varicella zoster virus, which causes chickenpox. So we are the reservoir for it, it lives within us, and we are the transmitter of it. But that's not always the case, all right? So the reservoir and the transmitter are not always the same. So let's say, for example, soil is the natural reservoir for Clostridium botulinum, which is a bacteria. So it's a soil bacteria. So that's the reservoir, is it lives in the soil. And this is Clostridium botulinum causes botulism. So even though this bacteria has its natural habitat in the soil, most people do not get botulism because they eat soil, right? Nobody's out there eating soil. Rather, there's a transmitter of contaminated food, because the food does, let's say your vegetables do grow in the soil. So it can come to become it can be on your food, and then if you don't wash your food, then you can ingest the bacteria. So the transmitter would be the food. Okay. So they can be the same, your reservoir and your transmitter, or they can be different. All right, let's talk about animals. So when we talk about animal infections or animal-acquired infections, we call these zoonoses. All right, so zoo referring to animals. Once again, you go to the zoo to see your animals. So zoonosis comprise a very large percentage of all newly identified infectious diseases, as well as many existing ones. So some diseases such as HIV began as a zoonosis, but later mutated to become only one that exists in humans. Ebola virus, right, is also one that started out as a zoonotic disease. Okay, so zoonosis is an infectious disease that has jumped from animals to humans. So these pathogens can be bacterial or viral, and they can spread to humans through either direct contact or through food or water or the environment. And they really represent a major public health problem around the world. And that's due to our close relationship with animals. We use animals for agriculture. We use them as companions. And of course, we come across them in our natural environments. So we can see here many of the animal reservoirs where we can acquire a zoonosis. So most of them are going to come from arthropods. So this includes your mosquitoes and your ticks. So getting a mosquito bite or a tick bite can help to spread the pathogen to you. Mammals, right? So dogs and other mammals and bats would be examples. And then we have birds, right? So we have all kinds of avian flus. And then last on the list would be your lizards. Okay, so as it says, 70% of all new emerging diseases are zoonotic. So that's kind of important. So we need to pay attention to that, because this is where our next pandemic is going to be coming from, is probably some type of zoonotic source. So just to give you some more examples from mammals, we've got rabies, yellow fever from birds and mammals, influenzas, right? All our avian flus from chickens, birds, our swine flus. West Nile virus comes from mosquitoes. We get Rocky Mountain spotted fever from ticks. So you can see just kind of a whole list of different ones that are kind of zoonotic. Now, one important reason for the spread of zoonosis is because there's so many changes that are happening in our environment. So we were mentioning mammals as being up there with helping to spread zoonotic diseases. So bats especially, but also rodents can also help to spread diseases. So one of the factors is the rapid increase in the human population and our kind of encroachment on animal habitats, right? So we have a lot of deforestation that is happening across the world where we're cutting down forests. And so animals don't really have places to go, so they kind of move in with us, especially when we start building a lot more suburbs and houses. We start to become in contact with these organisms much more. So we're seeing kind of what we call a spillover effect, where we get this transmission of a pathogen from one host species to a new one. And we're kind of crossing biological barriers there. So what may have only been a pathogen, let's say in birds, and because of our contact with them now has crossed over into humans and become an issue for us. All right. So it's something to think about. And even global warming, right? Global warming is causing other areas to be warmer than normal, and that's helping to increase the range of certain mosquitoes. So dengue and breakbone fever is on the rise because of the spread of mosquitoes into areas where they didn't really exist before. Okay. All right, so we've talked about animals as being kind of one of the transmitters and reservoirs of infectious agents. So we can group infectious diseases kind of based upon how they're acquired. So we use the term communicable to describe illnesses that are caused by viruses or bacteria that are spread through contact with contaminated surfaces or bodily fluids or blood products or even insect bites or even through the air. So communicable, as it says, it's kind of a disease that's spread from one host to another, and that can be either through direct or indirect contact. And we'll talk about what direct and indirect contact means. All right. So there are lots of examples of communicable diseases. Some of these require reporting to the appropriate health departments or government agencies when individuals go in to see their healthcare provider. They may have to report that they have seen a case of measles, let's say, and that allows health departments to track these diseases. So communicable diseases would be such things as HIV, hepatitis A, B, or C, as I said, measles, salmonella, and any bloodborne illnesses are mainly communicable. And so these are most commonly spread through what we call the fecal-oral route. They're spread through food, through sexual intercourse, through insect bites, as it says, direct and indirect contact. Now, if a communicable disease is contagious, then it is spread through direct contact. Right, so it's highly communicable. So it's very easily spread from one individual to another, right? So not all communicable diseases are spread by direct contact. So malaria is an example. So if somebody has malaria, but they're not contagious, you cannot get malaria from somebody who has malaria. You have to get malaria from being bitten by a mosquito. Okay, so contagious is different from communicable. So now we also have what we consider to be non-communicable diseases. So this is a disease that is not spread from one host to another. Okay, and we're using the CDC's and the World Health Organization's definition here. So it says it's typically chronic or slow progressing. All right, so they are due typically to genetic factors or physiological factors or even behavioral factors. So cancer is non-communicable. Cardiovascular diseases are non-communicable. So like heart attacks and strokes are non-communicable. Asthma, diabetes are non-communicable. Okay, so those are kind of how we defined what's going on. All right, and then we can talk about how these diseases spread across populations. So we have epidemics, pandemics, and endemic diseases. So an epidemic refers to a sudden increase in the number of disease cases, and that's above what is normally expected in a specific area. So in 2014, the Ebola outbreak in West Africa would be an example of an epidemic. A pandemic occurs when an epidemic spreads across multiple countries or continents and affects a large number of people. So we know the COVID-19 was a pandemic because it impacted nearly every country worldwide. Versus endemic is a disease that is consistently present at a stable level within a particular region. So malaria within Africa, would be an example of that, or chickenpox before the vaccinations occurred. That was pretty much widespread, and that would be endemic.